Hey everyone, Kevin here. I have repeatedly seen the argument lately that public education continues to fail because we've never recovered from COVID and the subsequent school closures. David and I did an entire podcast episode on this already, but I felt that the topic deserved a slight refresh because this conversation will cover it from a bit of a different direction. Namely, we need to stop blaming the pandemic for the continuing problems in education. That original podcast discussion more covered the fact that COVID simply exacerbated the existing issues that were already there, and there is no debating that topic because it's the truth. Any teacher who taught before and following the pandemic can tell you that the issues only got worse because of it. I mean, COVID didn't create new problems, unless you count the terrible learning loss students experienced following distance learning, which we're still trying to fully understand the impact it had on students today. And I am acutely aware of the mental health crisis that spawned from that, and I am not dismissing it, but rather pointing out that solely focusing on it fails to look at how we plan to move forward from here. And therein lies my main point for this video. We aren't in distance learning anymore. The vast majority of schools went back to in person instruction by August of 2021. I know some that went back as early as January of 2021. So we're going on 3 years since the pandemic effectively ended. So, yes, the learning loss is still an issue, which, if we're being honest, is going to plague educators for a generation, at least until those who were first graders in 2020 graduate high school. But we need to stop looking at the problems of education as ones created by COVID. The pandemic is over, guys. We need to look at it why education is the way it is now and how we're going to fix it. So let's examine why it's the way it is. Number one, students are more disengaged and bored than they've ever have been before. Number two, students are more violent than they ever have been before. And number three, student absenteeism is off the charts. So, why is that? Well, Gen Z, or whatever the main generation or school is these days, it constantly changes, were born and raised as digital natives. They grew up with technology and are bombarded with it nearly 24/7. It's also why we are struggling to maintain their attention and why the absurd notion that teachers should be entertainers exists too. We only have to be interesting. And as I have said many times, school isn't that interesting anymore to either teachers or students. There's little to no creativity left these days. So why do you think so many educators are burning out? We can't be creative. Modern learners need more imagery, videos, hands on activities, and personalized learning, things which are all incredibly difficult for educators to provide because we're so hamstrung by policymakers and administrators latching onto new fads or implementing new initiatives and standards that we aren't allowed to be creative like today's students need. Furthermore, kids need to feel that they can self direct and feel relevance in what they're learning. If anything, I am seeing pedagogy and andragogy beginning to overlap more and more every day due to that exact reason. We need to recognize that students need structure and accountability, which we also don't provide after COVID because we couldn't really keep them accountable during distance learning since they were at home. Plus, we simply continue that hands off practice when we return to in person instruction. I mean, why did we do that? Well, it made the lives of administrators easier, so of course they would latch onto that lack of accountability. They get to send students back to class immediately without having to do anything to remedy the situation that made us send them to the office in the first place. Admittedly, that was a slight tangent, but it all leads back to the point that we need to stop blaming the pandemic for the situation we're in and start blaming the system for not adapting to not only the aftermath of the pandemic, but to the needs and wants of modern learners. I've always found it hilariously ironic that teachers have to be some of the most adaptable people in the world, while education as a whole refuses to adapt or innovate at all. The system has always been stuck in the past and isn't flexible enough to make the changes we need to get students engaged again and decrease teacher burnout. The answer is not to blame COVID. The answer is to fix the system. But it's easier for them to just throw blame at the pandemic and school closures instead of taking responsibility and realizing they need to make changes. So, stop the blame game and commit to actual reform. But unfortunately, I don't see that happening anytime soon. And that's all for today. If you would like to discuss this further or have any questions, I'm always here to help. See you next time.